So the thing we have to navigate in our lives and art that we make, just as kind of in everything, is the sort of lack of conclusiveness about everything. And this is what's cool about postmodernism, is because it doesn't, it sort of infuriates binarists, because it's always full of its own contradictions, and it accepts its own contradictions. And that's kind of harder to do than it is to just, proceed in the classical manner, the Hegelian, like this, then that, then the synthesis, then this, then that, then, this nice orderly procession of how things grow and evolve, and, how one makes decisions. And it's infuriating, to people that want that. And you can see it in very intelligent people can't handle this. It's, I've always been a great admirer of Noam Chomsky. He's just one of the smartest people in the world, or whatever, all that kind of stuff. And you see him talking about, postmodern, post-structuralist French intellectuals, and he just, you could just tell he's just horrified by them. He thought of Foucault as the most amoral person in the world. He was terrified by him. And the thing that I think that sort of points up is that we kind of have to deal with that terror, right? Like, the world isn't a simple place, and whatever we choose to do in the world isn't going to be simple. We can't kind of base ourselves on that we're going to reach a point with anything, any point of conclusiveness. We're kind of in the soup of this, and this is what I really love about I really love about the people that Chomsky hates so much, is that they're aware that this is a mess, and that with great rigor you can kind of grope your way around in this mess and, come up with stuff. It's not like you're going to solve all the problems. It's not like, things don't get settled. Everything is, in its clamor and its tumultuousness, that's real life. And people who look for that, that sort of clarity around things, they cheat themselves of lots of nuance, and also of they're just closing, paths of exploration off to themselves. They're just kind of saying, oh, we're not going there, we're not going there, that's not a place to go, and stuff like that. And who wants that as a life, I think we're kind of better off if we have a healthy amount of contempt for any sort of certainty and any kind of, rigidity anywhere. And, to me, this is the real divide. It isn't like, conservative and liberal values, that's not really the divide. The divide is between people who want stability and people who are willing to accept a certain amount of instability, and that happens on both sides of this manufactured political divide. Is that, you know, there's this craving for stability, and it takes the form of trying to deny the complexity of things. And in music, you know, that's kind of what the traditional concept of music was all about, was getting this clarity of, you know, sound and pitch and precision of meter and things like that. And it kind of aspires to that. And this is even true of like, you know, Harry Parch, you know, obviously, you know, one of my heroes. I studied him a lot, and like he's kind of pounding his head around trying to get something out of this that he knows isn't there, you know, and I think that's our deep structural, social, and aesthetic problem, is that we kind of strive for something that isn't there, instead of accepting that, you know, our smallness in relationship to this. And when we try to become authoritarian around anything, I think we just lose the plot, basically. And so the you know, the I like the postmodern idea of discourse, you know, as opposed to kind of, you know, previous philosophical thinking is very non-discursive. It like makes its point and it argues and it puts this in front of that, and, you know, it's like it's like your basic TED talk, is you kind of make this case and it proceeds, and, you know, by the end of it, everybody's supposed to agree with you. And you know, I'm not moved by those things, and I kind of haven't been in my life. Like, you know, I kind of, you know, as a kid, I kind of thought grown-ups were stupid. And I've never really lost that idea, you know. Once upon a time, it was like second or third grade or something, and we were supposed to draw a picture of, you know, what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I couldn't think of anything, you know. It's like it's like, who'd want to be one of them, you know? You know, when you're a kid and you look at adults, is they do boring things, and, you know, they don't seem to enjoy themselves very often, you know, like grown-up people tend to be like, you know, just not really very joyful, you know. They're not all that cheerful most of the time, you know. You know, it's like, who'd want to be like that? And that has really never left me, you know. It's very easy, if you're young, to be really unimpressed by, you know, as you learn about the world, you find out that it's, you know, polluted and cruel and unjust and all this stuff, you know. You just look at it, and common sense tells you this sucks, right? And so why does it suck? Well, kind of the reason it sucks is because people seek stability in a thing that there isn't any in. And so they're disappointed, right? Like, you know, like they do everything they can about this thing, you know, and you know, cast yourself back like several generations or a couple of generations, and you know, read old sci-fi from like the 40s and 50s, and like atomic power is just gonna like make everything awesome, you know, and people dedicated their lives to that, right? And people lived their lives with that premise, you know, this like, oh, wonderful future we were going to get from this stuff, right? You know, better living through chemistry. And no, it didn't really turn out like that, you know. So it's, you know, this is why adults tend to be disappointed, and why culture tends to be disappointing. And so the thing with the, you know, the Pomo frame of mind is like, you expect that and embrace what you can do instead of defining yourself so much by, you know, this concept of progress, or, you know, this idea that there are certainties in the world, you know, that kind of thing. Like, it sort of encourages one to embrace one's inner dynamism of whatever sort, you know. Make your difference, do your thing, don't worry about it so much. It's, you know, you can't have despair when when things go badly. You can't disempower yourself that way. You know, you have to just keep like participating and, you know, and trusting that that there are many in the same boat, you know, like they may not express their relationship to the discontinuity and the, you know, discursiveness of life in the same way, but they all feel it the same, you know. It's not like there's nothing that separates us that much from one another. Like, you know, and this goes back to my objection to the concept of the avant-garde too, is like, no, it's not, there will not be leaders that, you know, that bring us to this point of stability where everything is cool. It's like, it's totally stupid. It's, you know, people are going to do things, and the things that they do will, you know, shine lights into certain areas, and, you know, some of us may be interested in that and some of us may not. Cool, you know, that's just how it is. The idea that we're all participating takes the centrality out of, you know, anybody's particular insight. You know, none are any better than the others. And so I like this idea of discourse because it kind of takes that into account, you know, like whatever you're thinking about, there's a totally different way of thinking about it. And that doesn't mean don't think what you're thinking, you know. It doesn't mean that that's wrong. You know, this like rejectionist, you know, the old model is just that tries to simplify, like you eliminate things all the time, and it's this process of elimination. Occam's razor. Well, you take it and you cut here and throw all that away, and then you like move it over here and cut that and throw all that away, and you get this nice, simplistic, well-defined, you know, set of steps. And it just isn't the way things are, and you go back and look and go, well, and this is what Harry Parch did with music, was he got frustrated with how it sounded, and he goes, man, this whole scale thing is wrong, and it just leaves too much out. And the thing I think we have to embrace is that any set of choices we make are going to leave too much out. That doesn't mean stop making choices. That doesn't mean do things. It's just that when you do things, like allow them to be flexible, allow them to be, impermanent, allow them to be unstable. Like, you can do a lot with instability. One of the most fun things in the world is like swimming in current. That's really unstable. It's a blast. It's like it can also, like, people die in riptides all the time. Because that's the problem with it. Like, but if you're like, understand that you're in a riptide and, or in a current like that, being in it can be just as fun and exciting as anything. If you expect it to be something else, that's when it kills you. You think, oh, I'm just swimming along in this neutral water. Help, it's pulling me away. I can't get back. And so I think we need to approach life in, by extension, whatever we create in life, as if it is that. It is a riptide. It is, it's unstable. It's, it moves not subject to what we want it to do. What we want to do should be about our relationship within it, instead of like thinking, okay, it's this stable thing, and if I do this, that, and that, I will get to here. That might work for some things. The fun thing about, I work with mechanics, which is very deterministic that way. If you make this do this, it will do that. And you find ways of allowing that to happen. And, if you make this long, that'll be that long, and you can depend on that, and cool. But then as you start working with the sound world in combination to that, the sound world isn't nearly as simple, And so the two of them together, like, interact in this way, and they're both fun, and they're both instructive. There's no such thing as perfect mechanics, right? Until somebody actually makes a perpetual motion machine, there won't be. It's, there's always, friction in the world, and there's always noise and sound, and so the acceptance of that is a very postmodern idea, folks like my grandparents didn't like that. They were offended by the idea that the world couldn't be stable. They were like, it just bothered them. It upset them, and they'd been, I don't think it's really their fault. They'd been sort of raised to believe that there was this determinist, manifest destiny kind of thing around their culture, and and it was just about, well, you just beat down the enemies and then everything's fine. And it's a fundamentally different idea, not being able to bifurcate like that, you can't get to this point where there's this error that threatens everything. It's not like that, And my objection to this in the arts is that in the culture I grew up in anyway, they were trying to replace certainties with other certainties. And this was true in the arts as well as in, political philosophy, is trying to replace failing rigidities with newer rigidities. And that just kind of isn't going to work. It's the problem is the rigidness of things much more than the problem is the things that are rigid. That doesn't really work. The problem isn't that this particular rigid idea is flawed, even though it is. The problem is that this particular flawed idea was rigid. And the flaw in this idea was its rigidity, not necessarily what it sought to get to. So the flaw in equal temperament, for instance, the flaw in that is that it ended up excluding lots of things. It's not that the flaw in that, it's not a bad, evil system. It's just tended to end up not accepting that its incompleteness. And my hope is that all of us eventually accept this kind of, and we can accept it any way you want. Some people want life to just be like a joke, and other people might want to just be completely cynical about everything, and other people might want to just be, goofily positive, best of all possible worlds about things. And, those are all strategies of coping with this incompleteness. But I think we're, better off the more that we encourage our own inconclusiveness, our own internal incompletenesses, and instead of kind of arguing artistically, philosophically, whatever, for like, no, this is it, see, I got it, like, yeah, this, instead of doing that, it's going, well, maybe this, what do you think? And that's the essence of discourse as opposed to like proclamation. And I just keep coming back to to just how deeply offended like Chomsky, who's definitely a proclaimer, felt about being confronted with discourse. It's like really threatening. It's like, wow, I'm really good at this proclaiming thing, and I've taken on all comers and I worked them out. I'm smarter than everybody. Like Chomsky, like ridiculing, various opponents of his in debate. Those are fun, and he's really good at it. And then he runs into Foucault, and it's just like Foucault keeps like slipping away from him, and all with this like maniacal look of glee on his face. And it just got to his core, and it's and I'm not saying so much that that means you embrace Foucault. I think Foucault had lots of like really weird and stupid ideas about things at times in his life. But the thing that if I had to choose between the two, I would choose Foucault. And it's because of his willingness to make errors and his willingness to, like, you know, just kind of get into things with, you know, like, oh, just follow this, see where it goes, find out what's up with that, you know, and look at, like, really what deep down is making it happen, you know, like, Chomsky's willing to point out the flaws in anything except his own certainty and his own logical structure, you know. Anyhow, I think that's, you know, yeah, I just think that the postmodern idea is, it's like remembering when you're a child and you know that, you know, whatever authority figure is ruining your life at that moment, you know, parents, teachers, you know, whatever, you know, they're authoritatively right. You know, they know more than you. You know, they have more power than you, right? All that stuff. Like, that's all a given. But still, like, you know, they're wrong at the same time. And you can't prove it. You can't, you know, defeat them in debate. You can't disprove what they're saying. Any of that stuff. You know, you can't. You don't have the power to just simply refuse to do what they are, you know, making you do at whatever time. Like, you kind of have to do that. You know, shut up and get in the car, whatever. You know. But you still know, you know, just, you know, as a 7, 8, 9-year-old, like, you just know that's like, nah, you know, and you have to just kind of accept that and move along and realize, like, you have to make your own way through that. And the response that wants to become the authority figure, you know, that drives a whole lot of people. Is like, when they feel that as a kid, they want to end up being the adult. They want to be the one who can, you know, make the rules, and the one that can dictate and that kind of thing. You know, they want to get to be the one that define the terms, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's inherently stupid, you know. It's like, you know, this is wrong, and you know this is wrong when you're really young, you know, and very inexperienced, and that instinctive knowledge should maybe stay with you. And instead of embracing the negativity that comes with that, see, that's another aspect which I think is really, like, kind of poisoning the discourse, or preventing the discourse from really developing into anything, you know, interesting, is that what becomes smart and clever when you're young is this ability to mock those authority figures, right? Like, the, you know, the wise ass, class clown, you know, so forth kid in, like, you know, 4th, 5th grade, middle school, whatever, you know, that becomes a definition of intelligence. And I think that persists, like, into adulthood. Is if you can point out what's wrong with this, you know, like, when you're a kid, you have no power to do anything about it. That's the only thing you can really do. So cool, right? You know, like, the, you know, shit, I was a wise ass kid, right? You know, as you know, there's great value in this wise assedness. And But you have to kind of like get past that and stop valuing the negative critique quite so much, you know. After a while, the ability to negatively criticize becomes part and parcel of the authoritarian system that generates the things that you criticize. So, you know, it's just seemed to me that in, you know, recent politics across the West world is that it's been all about complaining, you know, and, you know, doesn't matter who's complaining, you know. Obviously, you know, I like Bernie Sanders better than Donald Trump, but if you just look at them as like authoritarians complaining about, you know, the authoritarian system in which we live, you know, they're exactly the same. You know, it's this, and it's totally unproductive. I don't think either one is very productive. It's and they're both like these brats in school who like can point out, like, you know, oh, whatever it is. I remember there is one kid I went to school. He was really funny, and you know, he kind of spent his whole time like just mocking teachers, you know, like about their shoes or, you know, their nose boogers or whatever. He was really good at it, and like, you know. And we all thought he was the smartest one around, right? Because he could just do that, you know. And just ways of picking at it, you know. And like I said, that's really valuable and empowering. Like, it's really good to have people like that, you know, in your class and stuff like that when you're a kid, because it makes you feel better about your disempowerment, you know, your nature of being a subject, you know, of, you know, you're definitely oppressed, right? And so this gives you some, like, you know, resistance, yay, you know, we make fun of this person, you know. Boy, does Mr. So-and-so smell bad, you know, like, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's really that awesome to allow that emotional imprinting to continue to define what we think is intelligence and what we think is insightful, you know. Someone's insight, you know, about what someone else is doing wrong, that's the most boring thing in the world. It really, you know, it really is the most boring thing in the world, you know. And the valuation of that tends to make people not do anything, you know. If your concern is what they're doing, that means you're not really doing anything, you know. And the point of discourse is kind of to grow things, but you just keep adding more stuff in there, and, you know, yeah, there's this, but yeah, what about that, you know, and just keep, you know, just keep working it. Let it be a living thing. Let it, you know, don't look for a rigidity in there. Yeah, artistically and sociologically and all those ways, I think the culture of complaint and the idea that critique is negative, you know, like, it doesn't have to be, you know, critique is just critique, and I think it's essential to think that way, to examine, to, like, you know, deconstruct and all that. But, you know, is this productive? That is the question, you know. to ask itself, and that we all should ask ourselves, is this productive? And not is this productive of something that necessarily resonates with, whatever, status quo, whatever the hell you want to call that thing, context, whatever, if you produce something and it doesn't necessarily resonate with that context well, then you're generating new context. Good, more contexts, non-exclusive, it doesn't do any good to just go, this context sucks, well, yeah, okay, so what, make another context, change the context, like, develop it, like, do things, Anyhow, so what even got me started on this was that we were talking about, about when you're talking to a camera as a medium, and originally this was a few years ago, like I kind of tried going to a script with this and just didn't work at all, like trying to stay on topic and all like that, and so it got me thinking about, like, the word that came up is, wow, this is very discursive, it just wanders around, and there's nothing inherently better about, like, having a single direction than there is to just radiating, right? Because the context of argument and stuff like that is that it should linearize, and but the context of life isn't that, so why would we want that? And what's fun about any of these things isn't that somebody arrived at a conclusion and you can use that conclusion as a new foundation for something. What's interesting about these is, like, you can make any foundation you want, you just have to do the work to do it, and that will be what it is, if it's it doesn't even matter whether, like, it ever becomes in any way solid, because whatever solidity there is going to be kind of a lie at some point. Any rigidity ends up being a weakness rather than a strength, and that's the essential point of discursive postmodern thinking, and that should be embraced instead of lamented, and I think that's a real growing pain that culturally we kind of need to be conscious of, at least, that we can't just kind of try to push aside, there's more and more and more of us, like, obviously, like, polycontexts and like that are going to be what we have to live with. I don't mean diversity and just the common sense, but that is the basic idea, is that, the notion that anyone is going to have any sort of authoritarian view of this that has any merit or any stability to it is just false. It's just, that isn't going to happen. And, we have to embrace the struggle involved in that and think of it less as struggle and as more of, you know, more of opportunity to examine and more of opportunity to become more involved in the complexities of things, you know. That's a great thing, and we're, you know, we have technologically now we have this great ability to develop really complex systems around ourselves in what we take in and what we know, and, you know, that kind of thing. You know, a great lesson from the, you know, the demographics in, you know, in politics, you know, in the West and the Mideast too, is that the echo chamber, the convincing style, the argument that tries to resolve to singularity, just backfires everywhere. You know, it's just like, it's terrible for everybody all the way around. Nobody gets what they want out of that. Nobody gets what, you know, and you know, the old school concept is, well, you just, you know, need to compromise. And yeah, in a shallow way, that's true. But in a deeper way is that you have to accept that the contexts we live in are just really complicated, and so we need to, like, stop trying to create a context where, you know, my idea of the right thing is the right thing for anybody else. You know, this is far more of a, you know, our old political ideas. They're just too simple and too unimaginative to really function. You know, anarchism is really messy and inconclusive as a context for life. But we're going to have to learn to deal with that, because whether we like it or not, it's what we already have and have always had. You know, is now that we can communicate with one another, and now that there are so many of us, it's just becoming more evident. And even cats know this. Even particularly wedgie cats know this. Come here. Yes, what do you think, huh? I like to sing songs to cats. Anyhow, so the nature of rambling is that I personally think that rambling, rather than linearly directed, you know, subject, predicate, object, you know, I really think that's more productive, even though on the face of it, it's not, you know. Yeah, obey the law of entropy, right? You know.